Welcome to the Unlock Your Block podcast, career empowerment with me, Robin Cartwright. Join me as I empower you to shine in your career, to up-level your life, and to go after your dreams. Let's talk. Hi, welcome to the Unlock Your Block podcast with me, Robin Cartwright. I'm so glad you're here today. And today I have a special guest. We are talking about leadership. We're going to talk about what it's like to be in leadership inside an organization. What's the expectations? And I have Susan Whitehead here with me. Thank you, Susan, for being here. Susan Whitehead is started out her career. So let me back this up. Susan Whitehead started out her career in the lab. Before moving into program management, she ascended the corporate ladder to earn an executive position of president and COO at Pact Pharma. Prior to joining Pact, Susan was a general manager and global head of operations at Caligor RX. She has also held positions in program operations and various leadership positions in biotech, pharma, and medical device. Susan has a seat on the board at Pact Pharma, Bay Area Young Survivors, and advisory board for California State University, Riverside for their Women Executive Leadership Program. Woo-hoo! In addition, she is a member of the Women's Business Leaders of the U.S. Healthcare Industry Foundation, WBL, Women in Bio, WIB, and is founding member of Chief, an organization created to connect and support senior executive women across industries. She is also the owner of Savvy Biopharma Consulting, where she provides coaching and consulting services, and Savvy Investments, LLC, where she invests in real estate funds as limited partner and manages a portfolio of investment properties. With a chemistry degree from Michigan State University and multiple certifications from Stanford, UC Berkeley, and Northwestern University, Susan's thirst for knowledge fuels her impact. Her mission to teach people to harness the power of purpose and ensure everyone's voice shapes the future. Susan is a pioneer in women's leadership, and I am so happy to have her here with me today. Thank you, Susan. And with that laundry list of everything you've done, where do you even find the time to do this? My goodness.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Robin, for having me today. I'm so honored to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you here. So you have been in leadership inside organizations for some time. Tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be a leader in an organization?
Yeah. So I think what you're asking me, Robin, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, is when you say, what does it mean to be a leader within an organization? It's like, what are we looking for?
Yeah, absolutely.
As kind of an executive who's running a company, what are you looking for in leadership amongst others?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. So, there's a lot of things that go into that. I mean, obviously the first thing is, do they have the technical skill set that's needed to fill whatever that open role is, or you feel like they're going above and beyond? But I think one thing that a lot of people think about is, I need to build this, skill set and expertise. And that is absolutely true. But what people need to start really focusing on is their leadership skills. So, when we were looking for, who do we want to promote or fill certain leadership positions within the company, we were constantly evaluating, like, what type of leader of people are they? Or if there's several people that are at the same level, have they gone above and beyond, and what have they done? And do others also view them, as having, like, you can't dispute what so-and-so has done. Now, of course, there's always going to be some naysayers, but I think what's really important is, I hear a lot, well, I want to be this level, right? I want to be a VP. I want to be, SVP. I've been doing this role for a long time, but I'm like, okay, and I know this sounds cliche, but so often, at least what I've heard, I don't know if it's true or if it's just me, but what I have certainly heard, over and over throughout my career is quite often you need to be performing at that level before you get the title.
Act as if, yes. I tell
Yeah.
my clients that all the time. You have to be that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not only be really great at whatever it is that you do and know your superpower, but really, start to look at what type of leader are you amongst others. Are people going to, particularly if you're getting a promotion and there needs to be some type of reorg, people who were formerly your peers, could end up reporting to you. So I think those are all really important. I've certainly been in positions before where I've wanted a promotion, and a former CEO, and I think this was some of the best advice that I've ever received in my career, told me, Susan, help me help you, right?
Right.
If you want this role, then how are these two other people going to feel about it? So you help me help you so that way, if I put you in this position, they're not going to leave because we need them too. And they will look to you as the leader.
Right. So in your career, how did you start getting into leadership? If you're a woman and you're wanting to move into leadership, where do you start?
Oh my
gosh. I get
that
question all the time. Where do I start?
Yeah, I know. And it's so funny because I definitely, like, the last 5 years or so of my career was really driving toward a leadership position. But, I'm almost embarrassed to say for several years before that, I was running from it because I was so afraid of it. Yeah, I was so afraid. So, I'll just share a little story with you, and then you might have to bring me back. See if I go off on a tangent here. But, when I was approached at PAC to take on the COO role and then learned exactly what that meant. So I was definitely aspiring to be a COO, and I had made that, I had been vocal about it and shared what my aspirations were. So I wasn't so surprised when they came and offered me the title, but, there was more that came with it. So I thought, okay, I'll be COO and I'll be working side by side, like, our CEO. And then I heard, he let me in on his plans that he was going to exit and then I would be in charge. That was not quite exactly what I had envisioned when I was asking for COO.
It's the eye opener.
Yeah. So, it took me some time to really think through, was I ready to step into that role? And making sure I was very vocal about what support I would need to be successful in that role.
Right.
And one thing that really weighed pretty heavily on me is, when I was at Caligor RX and they were making me general manager, I absolutely wanted it. But then they said, Susan, okay, we're going to change your title to executive vice president. And I was terrified. I was so terrified to say, oh my gosh, if this company is going to make me like EVP.
Was the job that much different?
No, the job would have been what I was doing. I guess it was imposter syndrome. Like, I was like, if I take this title and it doesn't work out, or if I fail, will somebody else hire me? Well, I have just put myself out of a future job. I felt very comfortable, like, at the VP level. But when you're talking like EVP, for whatever reason in my mind, I was afraid of it and ran from it. So I was like, okay, this is the second time, 2 companies in a row, Susan, where they're trying to give you more. There must be something about you. Yeah. So don't run from it this time.
Yeah. And I think that's it, because I coach a lot of women that run from it. They're so afraid. And like you said, all they did was change your title. Maybe you got a few more things that you were responsible for, but for the most part, it's the same job.
Yeah. It would have been exactly what I was doing, just a title to match, but I didn't feel worthy yet to take it.
Yeah, worthy. That's a good word. Yeah. Confidence, worthy, imposter syndrome. Oh, we women, we deal with that a lot.
Yeah. And one of the things I think that really opened up my eyes to that was being a member of Chief and listening to these other women who were either, emerging C-level execs or were already in the seat, and hearing them talk about their fears. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is normal. I didn't know it was normal. I didn't have anybody, I I probably was too proud, or I didn't have many people to share that fear with.
Or I think we look up to people and we don't realize that at the end of the day, they're just like you and I. They're just people trying to get through the day, trying to do a job. It's just sometimes their job has some different things than my job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. So leadership in an organization, when you look at them, you're looking at leaders. And have you ever run across individuals that you think that they would be a great leader, but they're just too afraid to move into that role?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I've had like some superstar people on my team that I thought, was really trying to mentor them and coach them. And I think anybody who's reported to me will probably tell you, like, every performance review or a development plan, I need to see what your personal development plan is. Like, how are you stretching and growing yourself? And, what I realized is some people are ready to take that on, and others, people move outside of their comfort zone. They have to make their own decision if they're going to do that. Like, what's the saying? Like, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yep.
So, I think one thing, and I've been really fortunate in my career to have some people who really help to pound the table for me, and close doors and help set the table for me to be successful. And in trying to do that and pay it forward, it's just, I've definitely experienced some time where somebody's just not quite ready to take that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I can relate because I had been there too at one point.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what about leadership and diversity? Because you've dealt with both of that. What advice do you have in that area?
Oh my gosh. So I have a lot of advice in this area, I think, gosh, there's so many conversations around diversity and I really love it. And I think the biggest advice I could give someone when you're walking into a room and you're feeling like, whether you're feeling or it's real, but you're the only, and you can fill in only whatever, only woman, only person of color, only, LGBTQ person in the room, only, single parent, only, person that's older. You can fill it in. For me, what's really helped, and I'll get back to your question about, what I think about leadership diversity, but for me, what really helped me to still show up and take my seat was there's going to be biases.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are, unconscious biases. And so really just working toward not letting that impact me, like staying focused on what is my purpose and intentionally choosing, like there's positive intent behind whatever is coming at me from this person, and being vulnerable sometimes to let them know, wow, what you just said, as a woman of color, I'm not sure how to interpret that.
Yeah. Right.
And so, and I've never been met with ill will when saying that. People have always been very thankful and have encouraged me to continue speaking up. But I think that it's really easy, and I don't want to diminish that this doesn't happen because it does, but I think it's really easy to get into that space of like, oh my gosh, well, they're not going to listen to me because I'm a woman, or they're not going to listen to me because of XYZ, whatever internal story you tell yourself.
Yeah.
But what I've really learned is, okay, maybe I don't think they heard me this first time, but if I believe it's really important, then I need to learn how to vocalize it in a different way that they do hear me and be persistent about it.
Right. So maybe practice in the mirror before you go in case you encounter it.
Yeah. Because I had another story for you real quick. I had reported to as a president one time. We didn't have a CEO, but it was a president of our division. And I don't want to say warned, but I had, highlighted like there was a risk around something. I sent an email and I verbally said it. And then when this issue came to fruition, I said, oh, this is what I had highlighted before. And I literally got chewed out for about 10 minutes in his office because I was told, well, I hadn't been vocal enough in the level of risk. Like it wasn't appropriate for me to just send an email, or if I had said it, I needed to stress it so he could clearly understand it. And so I have never let that happen again in my career.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
done.
Yeah, it was definitely a learning moment. But I think when we talk about diversity and leadership, it really should be about, you hear a lot of times diversity of thought. Well, that means you need to have, people of diverse backgrounds sitting around the table. And I also think, Robin, you and I having worked in the healthcare, biotech pharma space, one thing that's really important to me, and I know to a lot of us, is around healthcare equity. Right.
Yes.
Like a lot of us go into, spend our time in this field because we want to help patients.
Yep.
Right. We've either been impacted personally or we have a family member or, it's just a desire. It all revolves around patients.
Yeah.
But then you think, okay, well, how do you get drugs to market that can positively benefit and be accessible to all patients? Right. And then, you hear a lot about diversity in clinical trials and how do we improve that? But I really think it all starts with what's the leadership? Like, how diverse is the team that's working on the product, even when it's in development? And then how diverse is the clinical team that's enrolling the trial? Because when people show up to sign up for a clinical trial, they're looking, there has to be some trust. And if there's nobody that they can relate to culturally or, from various aspects, then they may not show up. And then you're not getting that data to know how it might impact certain subgroups of people.
Yeah. And I know when we worked together, we talked a lot about diversity, and there was not enough. Granted, we were in a small organization, but there was not enough of a representation, because when you bring that representation forward, you bring bits and pieces of a different viewpoint, different thought process. And that's what we really need in this world. And to be able to move forward with those different thought processes. And you brought up, when you walk into a room and you're thinking about all the people in the room, are they going to listen to me because I'm this X, Y, and Z? I'm a woman, I'm older, I'm LGBTQ, whatever it be. And I thought of, a lot of it stems from education. So I've run into situations where I'm older and I'm having that conversation with somebody and I'm saying, look, just because I'm older does not mean I can't do the job.
That's right.
It does not mean I don't have the energy to do the job. So, a lot of it when you're having that one-off conversation is education. So if you run into those situations where you've had to say, hey, here, as I stand here as a woman, let me give you my viewpoint of this, or
not so much from an interview perspective, but certainly, when we've been talking about messaging to the company, you're preparing for your all hands or something. I've definitely chimed in and said, and I always do it with from a positive intent. I don't think you mean this, but let me tell you what I just heard and how this may be perceived by some employees within the company.
I think that's huge in leadership. And I wish more women and more people would stand up and say something, not necessarily stand up, but speak up and say something and say it, like you said, in a positive light. So it comes across well.
Yeah. And you know what? And there are definitely times in my career where I have not, it's easier not to say something, right? But I think, anybody who's aspired to be a leader means sometimes you have to show up and say, have the difficult conversation. That is your job. And also you need to think about all the people who are trying to come behind you, right?
Oh, yeah.
And if nothing else, find the courage to have that conversation for them. Even if you're to a point where, I hear this a lot, I'm just going to leave. Okay, well, at least still give that feedback, because think of all the people, you're in a position where you can give feedback, and think of all the people who don't feel like they have a voice.
Right.
Or at least try to help pave the way so it's a little bit better for the next person.
Right. Exactly. And that's definitely a good leader. Yeah, exactly. So here we are talking about leadership, and you and I went through COVID together, and that was just quite the world. And, all of a sudden we're turned upside down. We're having to do everything online. What have you seen in the workplace in regards to leadership now that COVID's sort of over. I mean, it's still going around, but we're back to work. We're back to supposedly somewhat of a normal work world. What have you really seen change in leadership?
Oh, well, it's interesting. When I think about, and I do vividly remember going through the pandemic and our conversations at that time, it just was so surreal. I think one of the things that we really saw during the pandemic was around the Great Resignation, right? I mean, it was super hard to keep people. And even though we were in the pandemic at that time, I mean, the job market was still really hot, not the situation we're in now. But, and I think that really, what I saw was a shift. I also saw more conversations around DEI than I had ever experienced previously in my career. I can still remember when we got together and we talked about what happened at George Floyd at a company level. And I was petrified going into this discussion.
Really?
Totally. Because for me, that was around the time of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Oh, yeah.
And I was afraid that somebody was going to say all lives matter and where that conversation would go from there, because there was just topics at work that, in the past, I think I would have never even touched upon, where now we were having these conversations at work, which had been more like, in the past, we probably wouldn't have had.
No, we didn't go there. Yeah.
So, I really think that changed leadership. And then also, if you think of the more traditional, like hierarchical leadership top down, if employees didn't feel inspired or didn't feel like they were getting developed or, were not on board with the direction, I mean, people were just leaving.
Right.
And that was happening across the board at all companies. So I think, as a leader, you really needed to look and say, okay, how do I empower my people? How do I help support and develop them? How do I retain my talent here?
Right. Because we had a lot of people that were, working from home, and then, all of a sudden you got to go back into the office. And like, wait a minute, I have a life. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So it was this, then we went to this hybrid role.
Yeah.
And it was learning how to manage and inspire and keep those employees because they were leaving left and right.
Yep. Yeah. I also think at that time, we really needed to lead with more empathy because we didn't know what people were dealing with at home. We didn't know what people's situations were, and so many people were being impacted either financially, loss of loved ones, etc., from the pandemic.
Yeah. Do you think we're going now more into a more heartfelt type of leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I know that like now we're definitely, more in a hybrid. A lot of companies are bringing people back more, but I still feel like they're being more flexible than they were pre-pandemic.
Right.
I do feel that leadership is coming from more of a heartfelt place because I do think that people are just in general looking at how they spend their time a lot differently now.
Yeah. And I know we used to talk a lot about work-life balance, and now it's more like work-life integration. How do you integrate work into life and make it flow?
That's exactly. I agree with you.
Yeah. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about that.
Yeah.
So I'm attuned to all the articles and I'm like, this is interesting. How's this working out? So it's going to be really interesting. So one thing I wanted to ask you, since we're here, and you are a woman, so what advice would you give women who are aspiring to be leaders?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for asking it. The best advice I could give you is whatever it is that you do, get really good at it. Like really own it. Get really good at it. So when it's, whatever it is that you do, the company needs to get something done, you're like the go-to person for that. Because that gives you really a lot of leverage.
Yeah.
And then as you've honed your craft, think about, I used to hear, what's your brand? And I thought, this sounds so marketing and gimmicky. I didn't really quite get it. But really, your brand is about what sets you apart. Yeah. So now you've honed your craft and it is so good that nobody can dispute it, right? What differentiates you from somebody else that's really good at it? Because sometimes it's not always the best technically savvy person that gets the position, right? Because you're looking at this whole, what's all the leadership traits. So start to think about what differentiates you, right? And then what do people who report to you say about you as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing is you're going to have to be vulnerable. And I hear some of the resistance I hear quite a bit is, oh my gosh, I'm already working so much. Like I just possibly can't give any more. Look, there's only so many hours in a day. You're right. You're not going to give more because you're already like probably burning the midnight oil or what have you, right? This work-life integration, you've been working really hard because you're aspiring to be in that role. I think what I found that shifted for me though was it wasn't the number of hours necessarily. It was more around the amount of time I spent outside my comfort zone and getting comfortable, more comfortable with that.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. And I always tell people just take one step into that uncomfortable spot.
Yeah.
And then you'll start to feel more comfortable. For example, I'm doing these podcasts. I just do one and I feel a little better. I do another, I feel a little better. And here we are.
Great job, Robin.
So thank you, Susan, for being here. I truly appreciate it. Do you have any other advice for our listeners before we head off for the day?
Oh, gosh. I mean, just go for it. When you literally walk into the room, they tell you, like, take your seat at the table. Don't sit in the back, like when you're not virtual and you're live. Like, your voice matters, irrespective of what position you have, and really just own it.
Right. Exactly. Own it.
Yeah.
All right. You heard it, ladies. Own it. Thank you, Susan, for joining us. And we will have another podcast another time and invite Susan to join us later on. Have a great day.
Thank you, Robin.